They say peace is the absence of conflict. But in Red Pine Hollow, peace was a curtain. Draw it back, and you'd see the stage was already burning. The first gunshot didn't sound real. It came too clean, too sudden like a sound effect on television, not something meant to tear through real skin, muscle, and bone. But when I opened the door and saw Miles collapsing in my driveway, arms flailing, his blood soaking into the gravel like spilled wine, reality came crashing in like a freight train. I dropped the coffee mug I'd been holding. The ceramic shattered on the porch steps, but I didn't even flinch. My body moved before my brain caught up. I was already sprinting across the porch barefoot, gravel slicing into my heels, the mountain air freezing against my face. Miles. He didn't answer. His lips moved, but there was no sound, just a soft wheeze and a bubbling groan. He gripped his leg, red pouring through his fingers. That's when I saw her. Selena Wakefield. Standing 10 feet away, calm as a winter lake, holding a silver-plated pistol with both hands. Her pearl-white blazer was spotless. Not a wrinkle, not a bead of sweat. Just the HOA president of Red Pine Hollow. Standing at the edge of my lawn like this was her goddamn jurisdiction. I had to, she said flatly, like she was explaining a zoning violation. He was trespassing. I feared for my life. I stared at her, stunned. My mind kept searching for an explanation, but all it found was rage. Miles Chang had been my best friend since Quantico, a forensic financial analyst, painfully brilliant, often annoying, but the one man I trusted more than anyone. He wasn't armed. He wasn't dangerous. All he carried was a backpack and a folder full of spreadsheets. And now he was bleeding out in my yard because of a woman who thought she could silence questions with a bullet. I dropped to my knees beside him. Hey, stay with me. You hear me? I pressed both hands onto the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. It was bad femoral artery, probably. Miles was pale, his eyes flickering. She knows, he whispered. Don't talk, I got you. Help's coming. But even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe it. Because this wasn't just an accident, this wasn't panic, this was planned. And if that was true, it meant someone like Selena Wakefield, someone who chaired the HOA, coordinated block parties, smiled with practiced grace at every town meeting, had something so dangerous to hide, she was willing to commit attempted murder to protect it. I'd moved to Red Pine Hollow 18 months ago, thinking I was done. Done with subpoenas, done with wiretaps, done with staring into the eyes of people who lied for a living. 15 years as a federal investigator with the Financial Crimes Division will do that to a man. I thought I'd found peace in these pines. But peace in this place was an illusion. No crime, no noise, no questions. Not because the town was safe, because someone had made it silent. As I held Miles's trembling hand, listening to the wail of sirens growing closer, one thought burned like fire behind my eyes. What the hell had we uncovered? And how many more bodies would it take to bury the truth? Red Pine Hollow wasn't just peaceful. It was designed to be. Nestled in a bend of the Colorado Range, the town had only one entrance road, lined with sugar pines and tall birches that looked like something out of a painting. 34 homes, identical in spacing, all built in the last 5 years by a single developer who bragged about community-centric symmetry. It had won awards. Real estate bloggers called it the future of secure suburban living. When I bought my cabin here 18 months ago, I was the third newest resident. Selena Wakefield came by that first week, smiling like the woman in every HOA brochure, hair styled to surgical precision, voice perfectly paced between warm and assertive. "Welcome to the safest place you'll ever live, Mr. Hale," she said. "We take care of our own here." And I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. Back then, I needed something that felt safe. Not statistically safe, emotionally safe. My last case with the Bureau had cost me the last pieces of my marriage and the will to keep pretending I could fix broken systems from inside the machine. It was a corporate pension fraud ring that spanned 3 states and killed the retirement dreams of hundreds. I got the convictions. I got the headlines. But I also got a bottle of whiskey, a weak habit, and a look in the mirror that started to feel foreign. So I walked away, bought the cabin, bought silence, bought the lie that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to keep fighting. Red Pine Hollow offered exactly what I was looking for. No crime, no drama, no noise. Even the dogs were quiet. People waved when they passed, but not too long. Everything was clipped, efficient, neighborly like a Norman Rockwell painting left on low simmer. But now, as I sat in the ER waiting room with Miles's blood dried into the creases of my knuckles, I saw it for what it really was. This place didn't feel peaceful because it was good. It felt peaceful because someone had worked very, very hard to make it controlled. Controlled smiles, controlled landscaping, controlled information. And at the center of that web, Selena Wakefield. The night before the shooting, Miles had said something strange. We were sitting on my porch, the pine shadows stretching long across the gravel, his laptop balanced on his knees. You ever notice how this place feels? Scripted? He asked, not looking up. Scripted how? I asked. Sipping bourbon, like everyone's reading from the same goddamn HOA playbook. Same contractors. Same complaints. Same insurance provider. He paused. It's not just boring, Ethan. It's engineered. I brushed him off. Told him he was being paranoid. He didn't push it. Just gave me that lopsided grin and said, paranoia is just pattern recognition with bad PR. Now, hours later, I couldn't shake his voice. Couldn't unsee what I hadn't seen before. How the neighborhood cameras weren't just for safety, they faced inward. How every monthly newsletter focused on community, unity, not transparency. How no one ever talked about the incidents, the break-ins, the fires, the accidents. I'd chalked it up to coincidence. Life happens, even in manicured paradises. But when it happens only when no one's home, when every claim is processed through the same firm, with Selena's signature somewhere in the file, when nobody ever complains, that's not coincidence, that's curation. That's power disguised as concern. The morning after the shooting, the neighborhood was quiet again. The blood had been scrubbed from the gravel. The sirens were gone. Selena's porch lights were on, as if nothing had happened. And in every window, curtains twitched, then closed. Red Pine Hollow had returned to its default setting. Stillness. But I knew now that beneath the stillness was something dangerous. Not just criminal. Not just fraudulent. Systemic. Orchestrated. Psychologically precise. And if I knew anything from my years chasing white-collar predators, it was this. The most dangerous people are the ones who don't think they're doing anything wrong. 2 days after the shooting, I unlocked Miles's laptop. The screen blinked awake with a soft hum, and the first thing I saw was the spreadsheet he'd left open, a sprawling web of numbers, timestamps, cross-indexed addresses, and color-coded flags. For most people, it would have looked like chaos. But to me, to someone who'd spent a decade hunting white-collar crime rings, it read like a confession. Miles always named his files with sarcasm. This one was called Nothing to See Here, .xlsx. The irony hit different now. I sat at the dining table, blinds drawn, coffee gone cold beside me. Outside, Red Pine Hollow was still its picture-perfect self-retired couples, walking designer dogs, landscapers trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. Selena's porch had a new wreath. The woman had shot a man in front of witnesses, and yet she still had time to redecorate. But the numbers? The numbers were bleeding. And numbers don't lie, people do. Miles had traced 17 insurance claims in the past 12 months. That's one for every 2 homes in our neighborhood. At first glance, it looked like bad luck. Faulty wiring, basement floods, minor break-ins. But Miles had layered in weather reports, attendance at HOA events, time of day trends. And that's where things got sinister. 12 of the 17 incidents occurred within 15 minutes of the homeowner leaving their house. 10 occurred during HOA-sponsored events. All 17 were approved and paid out by the same insurance provider, Hearthgate Mutual. Guess who was listed as the referring community liaison in every single case? Selena Wakefield. He'd written it in bold red font beneath the final column. This is not randomness. It's orchestration, synthetic loss, systematically timed, insurance laundering, insurance laundering. 2 words that didn't belong together, and yet fit this place perfectly. I felt a chill crawl down my back as I clicked through the folder structure. Miles hadn't just been poking around. He'd been digging deep. He'd pulled public financials from the HOA, campaign donation records from the previous mayoral race, even thermal satellite overlays of home temperatures before and after fire incidents. The man was a machine when he got obsessed. Now, I realized, He'd been right to be. There was a video file too. Grainy, low-resolution night vision. Dated 6 weeks ago. I hit play. A man unknown, tall, wearing a contractor's jumpsuit moving across someone's backyard. He paused by a side panel, unscrewed something, inserted a small cylinder, and sealed it back up. The file name said it all. Gas leak, 2:14 a.m. Unit 18. Schedule matched. Unit 18 was the home of Helen McCarthy. 2 weeks after that footage, she'd filed a claim for an unexpected gas-related failure. Hearthgate paid $42,000. Selena had hosted a neighborhood potluck the night it happened. This wasn't insurance. This was arson as a service. My throat tightened. This wasn't just fraud. It was psychological manipulation at scale. People here weren't victims of crime. They were victims of design. Their pain had been engineered for profit. I opened another tab. Local crime stats. According to the Red Pine PD, the neighborhood had experienced a 70% increase in home-related incidents in the past 2 years. And yet, no formal investigations. No arrests. No public concern. Why? Because every victim was compensated, pleased, quiet. Selena had created a system where misfortune became reward. You suffer a little, she makes it right. Over time, you learn not to ask why things go wrong. You learn to accept your good fortune and keep your head down. That's not safety, that's submission. Miles must have realized all this too. That's why he couldn't stop digging. That's why he ended up bleeding out in my yard. Because he'd finally crossed the line between noticing something and proving it. And now, I had the evidence. But I also had a target on my back. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. Across the street, Selena was watering her flower beds. She looked up, caught me watching, and smiled. That smile, too perfect, like everything in Red Pine Hollow. Except now, I knew better. The numbers weren't just data, they were symptoms. And this town was already sick. By dawn, the story had already changed. Not mine, hers. Selena Wakefield was on the local morning news by 7:12 a.m., dressed in a powder blue blouse, pearls at her throat, tearful but composed. She stood on the front steps of the HOA community office, flags flapping behind her, microphones shoved forward like hungry mouths. I just want to say how deeply sorry I am for the incident outside Mr. Hale's home. I feared for my safety. The man approached aggressively, refused to identify himself, and was carrying equipment that looked military grade. I did what I had to do to protect myself and the integrity of our neighborhood. Protect herself. From Miles, a man who once got winded climbing stairs, whose greatest weapon was Microsoft Excel. But the real trick wasn't in what she said, it was in how she said it. Measured, earnest, carefully rehearsed, pauses long enough to feel human, short enough to avoid scrutiny. The reporters nodded. The neighbors watching behind their curtains breathed a little easier. That was the magic of Selena Wakefield. She didn't fight you with fists. She rewrote the script, cast herself as the protagonist, and handed everyone else a supporting role. And it worked, at least for now. By 10 a.m., 2 sheriff's deputies knocked on my door. They weren't hostile, just cautious. Like they were approaching a man who might have landmines in his basement. Mr. Hale, we'd like to ask a few questions about your friend, about what he was doing here, about his equipment. I stared at them for a beat too long. You mean his laptop? The taller one, a deputy with a mustache like a disappointed raccoon, cleared his throat. Mrs. Wakefield indicated the man had surveillance tools, possibly recording devices. She said he was taking notes on residents, mapping properties, gathering intel, that he might have been connected to an outside group, possibly with malicious intent. I almost laughed. Almost. But the look in their eyes wasn't accusatory. It was uncertain. Selena had done enough to make them question. And that's all she needed. Doubt is a virus. Plant the seed, and the system takes care of the rest. I gave them nothing, just polite indifference. He was helping me with finances, I said. He's a data analyst, that's all. They wrote it down like it might be true. By noon, the HOA sent an emergency bulletin to all residents. In light of recent events, your safety is our top priority. We urge everyone to remain vigilant. Please report suspicious activity. Together, we protect Red Pine Hollow. No mention of Miles's name. No mention of the shooting. Just recent events. A neat euphemism for blood on the gravel and a bullet hole in my driveway. I sat on my porch with a cold beer and a colder temper, watching as neighbors passed with quick glances and stiff smiles. I'd gone from friendly recluse to walking question mark in 48 hours. And Selena? She was walking house to house, checking in, comforting, spreading her version like gospel. The message was simple. Everything is fine, I'm in control, trust me. But what chilled me wasn't the story she told. It was how easily people believed it. Because belief isn't about truth. It's about comfort. People didn't want to believe someone was manipulating them. They wanted to believe their HOA president was a hero who made hard choices. So they leaned into the lie. Because the lie made them feel safe. And while they did, Selena moved on to phase 2. Erasure. That afternoon, the HOA maintenance crew, 2 men in matching polos, showed up and pressure washed the driveway. Note at my request. No knock, no courtesy call, just silence, just bleach. I watched them work from the window, white mist rising over the exact spot where Miles had bled out. By sundown, there was no trace he'd ever been there. Just clean stone, just empty space. It was then I realized what Selena was really doing. She wasn't just denying the truth. She was rewriting reality in real time, wiping away evidence, controlling the narrative, reframing trauma into inconvenience. It was the same strategy she'd used with the fires, the floods, the break-ins. Unfortunate incidents followed by swift resolution, never investigation, never accountability. Just enough insurance money to make people stop asking questions. She didn't need force. She had structure. And structure is more powerful than fear, because people obey systems even when they suspect they're broken. But I wasn't people. Not anymore. Miles had shown me the numbers. Now I had the proof. And more importantly, I had nothing left to lose. I picked up the phone, called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman who'd worked with me on the Portwell audit scandal, a federal investigator with a mind like a steel trap and a moral code forged in fire. Her name was Sophia Morales. And if Selena Wakefield thought the game was over, she was about to learn what it felt like to lose control. Sophia Morales showed up in a rented gray SUV, sunglasses too dark for the weather, and a duffel bag that didn't quite match her blazer. She stepped out like a question with a badge. I heard someone tried to erase a body with bleach, she said. I didn't respond. Just opened the door and let her in. She was sharper than I remembered. Leaner, too. Years in federal investigations had hardened her, not in the chest-thumping way of street cops, but in the silent edge behind her eyes. The way her fingers hovered over the laptop, as if it were a loaded weapon, told me she already knew how deep we were. Jesus, she muttered as the spreadsheet unfolded. This isn't fraud. This is engineered failure, calculated chaos. Design dependency, I added. She breaks it, she fixes it, she profits. Sophia paused, eyes narrowing. Why now? She asked. Why shoot your friend in broad daylight? Why risk exposure? Because Miles got too close, I said. Because he wasn't just connecting numbers, he was connecting intent. Pattern is one thing, proof is another. We spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing everything. HOA financials, property transfers, Hearthgate's board connections. The breadcrumbs led to a chilling conclusion. Selena wasn't acting alone. Hearthgate Mutual was a shell company, legally insulated, privately backed, with funding sources that ran through Delaware Holding Corp. And ended up in a Cayman address no one could touch without federal warrants. She'd been laundering fraudulent insurance claims through multiple communities, each one operated under the same sanitized HOA model. Red Pine Hollow was just one cell in a much larger body, and Miles had been patient zero. But no judge is going to sign a warrant off this, Sophia said flatly. Not without a real whistleblower, not without testimony or unshakable evidence. She's wiping everything, I said, digitally, physically, and now she's framing the narrative. If we wait for process, we're already behind. Sophia leaned back in the chair, cracked her knuckles, and gave me the look I remembered from Portwell. So we go off book. It wasn't the first time we'd done it, but it felt different this time. Colder. Personal. By midnight, we had a plan. We'd split up. Sophia would follow the money. I'd follow the hardware. Miles's laptop had one last card to play. Before he died, he'd backed up his research to an encrypted thumb drive. He'd hidden it somewhere, of that I was sure. And if I knew Miles, he wouldn't put it in a lockbox. He'd embed it in something no one would notice. I found it behind a false panel in the base of my bookshelf, taped to a paperback copy of The Myth of Normal. I smiled. Miles was always a cynic. The files weren't just spreadsheets, they were audio clips, photographs, building blueprints. One video stood out, a time-stamped recording of a fire ignition device being installed beneath a neighbor's deck 36 hours before the accidental electrical fire report. This was no longer statistical anomaly. It was premeditated destruction. But even with the data, we needed something human. A voice. And that's when Sophia called me, voice low and steady. I found her. Who? Your wild card. The one thing Selena didn't calculate for. She tracked down Helen Park, a 70-year-old widow who'd quietly filed a homeowner's claim after her husband's death last year. It had been ruled a gas leak. Hearthgate paid her $92,000 in under a week. She'd moved to a smaller home shortly after quiet. Invisible. But Helen remembered. She remembered the smell. She remembered the clicking sound in the pipes for days before the incident. And she remembered the look in Selena's eyes when she came by to check in after the funeral, sympathetic, rehearsed, and 2 notches too eager. She knew. Helen whispered over the phone. She knew before I even filed the claim. That's not grief. That's management. Sophia asked the right questions. Slowly, gently, and Helen broke. Not in panic, but in relief. As if someone had finally confirmed what her nightmares had whispered for months. She made it look like mercy, Helen said, like she was helping us rebuild. But it wasn't help. It was payment for silence. We had what we needed. Data. Motive. Modus operandi. A living witness. But now, Selena knew we were hunting her. Because hours after that call, I returned home to find my cabin's door slightly ajar. I drew my sidearm out of instinct, old habits from an old life. The place was empty. No broken windows, no footprints, just one thing out of place. On the kitchen counter, a white envelope. Unmarked. Inside it, a single photo. It was taken from a high vantage point in my cabin porch 2 nights ago. Me and Sophia, heads close, laptops open, talking strategy. The timestamp was circled in red ink. Beneath it, a note written in graceful, looping cursive. Stop chasing ghosts. You forget I built this house. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. In this game, Selena Wakefield had the home field advantage. But she'd also made her first mistake. She let us know she was watching. Now we knew where to look. The morning after the envelope, Sophia called the bureau. We both knew what it meant. Crossing that line wasn't easy. We'd been gathering evidence outside the system because we didn't trust the system would move fast enough. But now that Selena had made it personal, had stepped inside my house without a sound, we couldn't pretend this was a quiet war anymore. This was escalation. Within 24 hours, 2 agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division touched down in Colorado Springs. They wore the same tailored suits I used to wear, asked the same clipped questions I used to ask, and walked with the same silent confidence I remembered. Their names were Agent Leora Jensen and Agent Grant Wallace. Both were sharp, focused, suspicious, but not of us, of what we were about to show them. Sophia laid out everything. The pattern of claims, the HOA's centralized structure, Hearthgate's shell corporation tree, and the thumb drive Miles had died protecting. But it wasn't until we played the video, the one with the arson device installed under Helen Park's deck, that Agent Wallace leaned forward, exhaled slowly, and said the words I'd been waiting for. That's enough for a federal subpoena. The next 48 hours were a blur of motion. Search warrants were drafted. Judges signed them. The HOA office was raided at 6:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Selena wasn't there. What they found was worse than even I expected. A concealed server tower beneath the community conference room floor. Encrypted backups of resident schedules, blueprints of homes, metadata tracking, travel routines, emergency contact lists, and worst of all, a file labeled Phase 2 Uncooperative Variables. Inside were names. Mine, Miles, Helen, Sophia. Next to each name was a designation. Risk level, critical, recommended action, incident simulation, gas, fire preferred, contingency, contain narrative via insurance payout plus public sympathy. We weren't just threats, we were planned losses. Paperwork to be filed, stories to be rewritten. They also found blueprints of my cabin detailed down to the gas lines beneath the crawl space. The system Miles had warned me about wasn't just theory, it had already been installed. I sat on my front steps that night, the weight of that knowledge curling in my gut like something alive. She was going to kill me. Not with a gun, not with a knife, with carbon monoxide, with plausible deniability. She would have made it look like an accident. She would have sent flowers. She would have paid the claim. And Red Pine Hollow would have stayed silent. But now the veil was off. And once you see the machine behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. When the agents questioned Helen Park, she agreed to testify. She even brought out a box she'd hidden for nearly a year, handwritten notes from her late husband, detailing his fears before he died. One line in particular stopped us all cold. They want us grateful, not safe. It was the thesis of the whole scheme, crystallized in one dying man's scrawl. That afternoon, the news broke. FBI investigates HOA insurance fraud in Red Pine Hollow. The coverage was cautious at first. Words like alleged and unconfirmed sources kept it soft. But the footage of agents hauling out computers, evidence bags, and confidential HOA documents painted a different story. Neighbors gathered, some stunned, some defiant, but many looked relieved. Not because they believed us, because deep down, they already knew. They'd known something was off, known the accidents were too frequent, too convenient, known that Selena always seemed to appear just in time, with just the right words and just the right payout. But comfort is addictive. And denial is easy when you're cashing checks. That night, a community meeting was called in the town hall. People came in droves, not to argue, but to ask. Why didn't we speak up? Why did we let her control everything? How did we not see it? The answer, of course, was simple. They did. They saw it in the way Selena deflected every tough question. They felt it in the way dissent was quietly smoothed over. They noticed the cameras facing inward, the newsletters worded like propaganda, the way every neighbor who asked too much seemed to disappear, move, go quiet. But no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud, because the first one always bleeds. Miles had bled, so had truth, but now it was too loud to silence. Selena's face was all over the news by Thursday, a statewide warrant for questioning. Her last known location was a private airstrip an hour outside town, abandoned by the time authorities arrived. She was gone, but she'd left something behind. In the HOA's cloud archive, hidden under layers of misdirection, was a document titled Legacy. It wasn't code. It wasn't financials. It was a manifesto. 8 pages, handwritten, scanned, and uploaded. A sermon about restoring balance, about reclaiming justice from a broken system, about building controlled prosperity where chaos once ruled. It was delusional, clinical, and haunting. Selena didn't think she was a criminal. She thought she was saving us. The silence of Red Pine Hollow had been her cathedral. The accidents were her sacraments. And every payout, every smile from a family rebuilding their home, to her, that was proof of righteousness. But the people she saved, they were afraid to sleep with the stove on. They kept one eye on the hallway cameras at night. They whispered to each other instead of speaking freely. Selena hadn't built safety. She'd built obedience. And when obedience finally fractured, so did her empire. The first real rain in months came 2 days after the warrant went public. Soft at first, then steady, washing away the dust from the sidewalk, the ash from burned-out questions, and maybe, just maybe, a little of the guilt. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching it fall over Red Pine Hollow. The streets were quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not curated, not controlled, just tired. Selena Wakefield was still missing. The airstrip had led to nothing. No security footage, no flight logs, just tire marks on wet tarmac, and a silence that echoed louder than any answer. The Bureau believed she had help. So did I. When you build a system designed to reward loyalty and punish resistance, you always have someone willing to carry your bags, even when the building is on fire. The investigation stretched beyond Colorado by the end of the week. 3 more communities flagged with identical claim patterns. 2 Hearthgate board members arrested. Selena's name tied to at least 4 shell companies, all masked beneath layers of legal protection and plausible deniability. But here, in Red Pine Hollow, the aftermath was quieter, slower. People stopped whispering. They started talking. Real conversations. Awkward, honest, fragile. The kind of talk that only happens after something breaks. At the next emergency town hall, I was asked to speak. I didn't want to, but I did. Not as an investigator, not as a victim, but as a neighbor. I stood in the same room where Selena had once hosted wine tastings and HOA budget votes, and I said what no one else had dared to say out loud. We all saw it. We just didn't know how to name it. Or worse, we didn't want to. I talked about Miles, about how he died not chasing numbers but chasing truth, and about how truth, in a place like this, wasn't welcome until it bled on the driveway. There were tears, some nods. One man walked out halfway through, but I kept going, because silence is where power festers, and we'd been silent long enough. After the meeting, Helen Park approached me. She handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of her late husband smiling, paint on his hands, mid-repair of the porch that would later explode. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note she'd never mailed. If I don't make it, don't let her build another statue out of my silence. She looked at me and said, "It's yours now." I didn't ask what she meant. I understood. In the weeks that followed, the HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote. In its place, a resident council was formed, rotating terms, open books, third-party audits. The bylaws were rewritten with one goal: no one rules unchallenged. As for Selena's home, the community voted to turn it into a wellness and trauma resource center, free for any resident who needed help unpacking the invisible wounds of being watched, manipulated, controlled. They asked if I wanted to cut the ribbon. I declined. But I did bring one thing on opening day: Miles's old laptop, sealed in a glass case, placed in the front hall with a plaque that read, "Truth matters, even when it's inconvenient, especially then." Sophia left 2 weeks later. The Bureau needed her back east. Before she left, we stood at the tree line just beyond my cabin, rain still clinging to pine needles. "You staying?" she asked. I thought about leaving, I said, but I realized, if I walk now, I'm no better than the ones who looked away. She nodded. "You're a stubborn bastard, Hale." "Yeah," I said, "but so was Miles." She smiled. The kind that hurts just behind the ribs. And then she was gone. It's strange, rebuilding a life you never meant to fight for. But maybe that's how all revolutions start. Not with fire, not with banners, but with a refusal to keep pretending everything is fine. As I write this, there's still no sign of Selena Wakefield. Some think she fled the country. Others whisper she's still watching, waiting to reclaim her narrative. And maybe they're right. People like her don't disappear. They hibernate. But the next time she resurfaces here or anywhere, there'll be more of us watching, asking questions, refusing comfort when it costs truth. Red Pine Hollow will never be perfect again. And that's a good thing. Perfection was the lie. Now we build something better. Imperfect, transparent, free. Not all evil wears a mask or carries a gun. Sometimes it smiles behind a podium, prints your neighborhood newsletter, and files your insurance claim with alarming efficiency. Sometimes it looks like leadership, feels like safety, and earns your gratitude until you realize it's built on fear you didn't even know you had. Selena Wakefield didn't see herself as a villain. She saw herself as an architect of order. A woman who took the chaos of broken systems, corporate insurance, HOA bureaucracy, suburban anxiety, and turned it into something functional. But she didn't build safety. She built obedience. And the tragedy is this: most people didn't see it until the walls started closing in. 1. Systemic control is the softest cage. Red Pine Hollow was never a crime scene in the traditional sense. There were no drive-by shootings, no mass robbers, no high-speed chases. There were schedules, policies, and predictable tragedies. There was comfort offered quickly after each disaster. There were answers, already printed and distributed. What Selena built wasn't a crime ring. It was a closed circuit of dependency. She engineered accidents, then delivered the solution. People were too grateful to ask why the fire started in the first place, too dependent to wonder who benefited most from their misfortune. That's how systemic abuse works. Not by force, by normalization. When everyone's suffering looks identical, no one sees it as a pattern. 2. Peace without accountability is a dangerous luxury. The residents of Red Pine weren't stupid. They were conditioned. Conditioned to conflate silence with stability, to equate streamlined efficiency with good governance, to ignore the voice in their heads that said, "That's odd," because it was easier to accept a payout than face a truth that could shatter the entire system they lived within. Selena's power didn't come from weapons. It came from conformity, from neighbors nodding along, from residents choosing comfort over confrontation. 3. The cost of looking away is paid in blood and memory. Miles didn't die because he made a mistake. He died because he chose not to look away. He died because he saw through the numbers, the perfect HOA pamphlets, the concerned leadership, and he spoke up. And the community didn't stop it. Not because they agreed with Selena, but because they hesitated. There's a lesson there that cuts deeper than any headline. Evil doesn't need your belief. It just needs your silence. 4. The keepers of conscience are never the loudest, but they matter most. Ethan Hale never set out to be a savior. He was a retired investigator trying to forget what he used to do. But conscience is a muscle it aches when neglected. He became a keeper of truth, not by choice, but by refusing to disappear into ease. Helen Park didn't think she was brave, but when she spoke, when she gave voice to her late husband's notes, she lit a match in a town that had lived too long in managed darkness. These are the people history forgets, but they're the ones who stop the cycle from repeating. 5. The true lesson. This story isn't just about insurance fraud or a rogue HOA president. It's about what happens when people outsource vigilance, when power centralizes without oversight, when peace becomes more valuable than truth. If your neighborhood has no dissent, if your leaders discourage questions, if things run too perfectly, you might not be living in harmony. You might be living in controlled silence. Never mistake quiet for justice. Never trade your voice for a payout. And never forget, your conscience is the last line of defense between you and manufactured order. Be that someone.